Just a couple more minutes. My distinguished ranking member, gentleman from Indiana, is on his way, and then we will then proceed. Maybe both gentlemen, Dr. Gutnick and Mr. Bent, you can go ahead and take up the I'm sorry, Dr. Gutnick has been really been tasked now. He was just here yesterday, and now he's here again today. I don't know how he does it. I think we will go ahead and proceed, and I will go ahead and make this a very... Diane? Come on over here. The subcommittee hearing will come to order. This is the Subcommittee on Asia Pacific and the Global Environment, and we will be conducting a hearing, as has already been stated in the program. And in proceeding, I will begin this hearing by sharing with our witnesses and the audience my opening statement. In due time, I'm sure my good friend, the distinguished gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Burton, will be here to also present his opening statement, and I'm also happy to have the distinguished lady from California as a former ambassador to the Federated States of Micronesia, now as the member of Congress representing the state of California, Congresswoman Diane Watson. For more than some 5 years ago, the President announced a dramatic new foreign assistance program called the Millennium Challenge Account, designed to change the way the United States provides aid to developing nations. There can be no doubt the approach has made some great strides, but we are here today to ensure those strides are accurately predicted, measured, and assessed for future policies. The Millennium Challenge Account was initially heralded by the administration, even by this Congress and by the development community, as a revolutionary approach to delivering foreign aid. The premise was that foreign aid works best in conjunction with adopting sound economic policies and democratic values. When governments make those crucial commitments, our government is committed to fund them. And since its inception in 2004, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, the administrating agency responsible for implementing the Millennium Challenge Account, has signed compacts totaling approximately $3.8 billion with 12 partnering countries. Most recently, it rewarded our democratic friends in Mozambique and Lesotho in Africa with commitments totaling nearly $830 million. The Millennium Challenge Corporation has stated time and again that it is guided by the principle that transformative economic growth occurs and succeeds in reducing poverty when countries take full responsibility for their own development. Partnership and complete engagements are the ingredients for successful development policies. This committee in the past has been supportive of these guiding principles. However, we have serious questions about the ability and the availability and the capability of the MCA to fulfill these goals, questions that bring us to the topic of the hearing today. On March of last year, the Millennium Challenge Corporation signed a $65.7 million compact with the Republic of Vanuatu, focusing primarily on rehabilitating transportation infrastructures, such as roads, wharves, and airstrips and warehouses. Although the compact is MCC's smallest in absolute dollars, it actually provides by far the largest amount relative to Vanuatu's population and gross domestic product. The Millennium Challenge Corporation said publicly that it expects the Vanuatu Compact to have a transformative impact on the country's economy, increasing per capita income and GDP, and benefiting some 60,000 poor and rural people. In turn, the chairman of the full committee, the distinguished gentleman from California, Chairman Tom Lantos, logically and appropriately commissioned or requested the General Accounting Office to review both the structure and the projected economic impact of the MCC's $6.7 million compact with Vanuatu. And for the benefit of my colleagues, Vanuatu is a South Pacific island country which was formerly colonized by the British and the French. As the population is about 207,000 people. The per capita income is at $1,600 per annum. And about half of the population live in less than $1 a day. Foreign aid is about $31 million. This is 3 years ago. Among the largest donor countries, Australia, New Zealand, Japan. Our country, I think, gave about $2.2 million in foreign assistance. There is presence there of our Peace Corps, and that amounts to about $2.1 million in terms of our presence there, Peace Corps-wise. Importantly, at the request of Chairman Lantos, the GAO examined the MCC's methodologies of projecting economic benefits, the MCC's portrayal and analysis of the projected benefits and risks that may affect the compact's impact. The GAO examined the extent to which the Vanuatu Compact capitalizes on the lessons learned from similar U.S.-funded development programs in the region. It also evaluated the extent to which the MCC's analysis for determining both economic rates of return and poverty reduction could be improved regarding Vanuatu and other countries receiving compacts. The GAO report findings called into serious question the Millennium Corporation, the MCC's ability to have a real transformative impact or compact countries. The GAO found that the MCC's portrayal of Vanuatu's deal's impact does not reflect the data and analysis underlying its projections of the compact's benefits. First, the MCC statement suggests that as a result of the compact, average income in Vanuatu will be 15% higher in 2010 and 37% higher in the year 2015 than they would be without the compact. However, MCC's underlying data shows that these percentages are cumulative. They represent the sum of increases that MCC projects for each year and uses 2005 as the baseline. On the other hand, GAO's analysis of MCC's data shows that actual gain in per capita income relative to income in 2005 would be 3.9% in 2010 or 4.6% in the year 2015. According to the GAO report, the MCC also states that GDP will increase by an additional 3% a year in Vanuatu thanks to the pact. But its data show that after GDP growth of 6% in 2007, the economy's growth will remain constant at about 3% as it would without the compact. Finally, the GAO finds that the MCC severely overstated the compact's projected impact on poverty. The MCC has stated that the compact would benefit approximately 65,000 poor people, the rural inhabitants living nearby and using the roads to access markets and social services. However, the underlying data, as analyzed by the GAO, show that only 43% of the financial benefits are expected to go to the local population, and the MCC cannot even guarantee that all of these benefits will go to the rural poor. The remaining 57% of the benefits are expected to accrue to other beneficiaries, including expatriate tourism services providers, transport providers, the Vanuatu government, and local businesses. How can we be expected to believe that the Vanuatu Compact will have a transformative impact on poverty when most of the benefits will be lavished on expatriates and big businesses? This strategy does not appear to dovetail with the broad philosophy of international economic development to lift the poor. But in fairness to the MCC, the GAO report was embargoed until yesterday, and I do not know if the MCC has had time to review the report and therefore to make proper responses. But if these findings are true, the case of Vanuatu, as documented by the GAO, paints a grim picture for MCC's future. For a program that has been championed by the administration and even the Congress as the new and most effective way to deliver foreign aid, it appears that the case of the Vanuatu Compact may undermine that very argument. What is baffling is that these inaccuracies and overclaims, as stated by the GAO, occurred with a compact that is minuscule compared to the more recent compacts, which are in the range from $350 million to $550 million each. What does this say about the MCC's advertised transformative impacts in the larger countries? I might also want to note that this request for the GAO study was not to single out the Republic of Vanuatu as an adversary or a country that is questionable in terms of its efforts to fulfill the necessary requirements in the paperwork that was submitted to the Millennium Account Corporation for consideration. The bottom line is, again, is whether our friends downtown or the administration and the officials involved here kind of stretched things a little bit to announce the great progress and effectiveness of the program, or if in fact that it is simply not the case. I look forward to hearing from our friends representing the MCC, as well as the GAO study representative of the GAO office. And at this time, before proceeding further, I would like to turn the time over to my good friend and former chairman of I had the honor of serving as a member of the Subcommittee on the Western Hemisphere, my good friend, the gentleman from Indiana, Congressman Burton, for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm taking the place of Mr. Manzullo, who's the ranking Republican on the committee today, because he has a very important interest in the Farm Bill, which is pending right now, so I apologize for him not being here.
You don't need to apologize, sir. And the fact that he's more worried about his cattle than I my fish.
Yeah, okay.
So it was a fair transfer that we had yesterday when we dialogued with us.
Okay.
But I do appreciate very much your pitching hitting for
no problem.
Mr. Manzullo.
I just want to say that this is an important hearing. I'm glad that you're holding it. The Millennium Challenge Corporation agreement with the government of Vanuatu. You have to forgive me because there's so many parts of the world with which I'm not really familiar. I know I've been to Guam, Saipan, but it's quite a bit south of there where we're talking about today.
Vanuatu was a former British and French colony, and the people there speak excellent French, by the way.
Well, my wife would love that. She was studying in Paris for 7 years. She's a beautiful place.
I think she will be very much
I'll take her down to Vanuatu when I get a chance. Anyhow, let me say that there's no question that there have been problems with the Millennium Challenge account. I have not seen the GAO report to which you referred. I don't know if it's already been published or if it's out or not, but I would like to see it and read it. I understand it was either released just recently or is going to be released very quickly. It troubles me from what I've heard and from what the ranking member has heard about how the MCC has been applied to Vanuatu. And I'm anxious to hear from Mr. Goodnick and Mr. Bent today. But I'd just like to say one thing. You know, the United States is a very philanthropic organization, country, and we're trying our best through a number of channels to help countries around the world, including Vanuatu. And if there are problems, we want to know about them, and if there are problems, we want to get them solved. And so without further ado, I just will say I look forward to the testimony, and I hope to learn as much as possible about the problems that we're talking about today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman for his opening statement. I think this is also something else that I need to share with my colleagues and also with the public. There always seems to be criticism from other nations suggesting that our country does not give enough in foreign assistance. Not only have we developed this, I think was a tremendous success of the program and how we're going to be implementing the money, I think somewhere around $5 to $6 billion that we're looking at and how we could be helpful to foreign countries. Many of our friends that even other countries don't realize that our membership in the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the Asian Development Bank, range somewhere between 25 to 30% of the assets. The contributions come from the American taxpayers' money, and even that goes to a tremendous amount of assistance that our country has given to foreign nations. So I just want to share that with my good friend and members of the committee that as to as you said, I could not say more to the fact that our country literally has given more than its fair share of its wealth in sharing or giving assistance to those countries that are in need financially. I now have the distinguished lady from California, Congresswoman Watson, for her opening statement.
And thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for this hearing. And I think it's the beginning of taking a real hard look at all aspects of our foreign assistance delivery system. I, too, am concerned about some of the problems that the Millennium Challenge Corporation has had in the past, and I welcome the opportunity to take some time to examine them. But I hope we can look forward at the promise of the MCC and some of the things it is accomplishing under the leadership of Ambassador Danovich. And we were together at the beginning of the week giving very positive promotion to what's being done in the Kingdom of Lesotho, and we're really pleased that we're making a difference and they're making a difference for their people. The key issue in this hearing seems to be the predicted benefits that will accrue to the people of Vanuatu as a result of the MCC-supported projects underway there. And this is a very important issue. I've been an outspoken advocate for improving both the quality and the utility of measured results for foreign assistance, and we need good metrics on foreign assistance to know if our investments are truly achieving positive results. And I think that the GAO report raises some important issues for MCC to consider moving forward with future projects. But I think it's important to keep this feedback in perspective. This GAO report gives important lessons for future MCC projects. The MCC is under good leadership, and for the true test of that leadership is how they incorporate the lessons that appear in the GAO study. And I expect we will hear from Mr. Bent that they have plans in place to do so. And furthermore, I would hope my colleagues do not interpret the results of this report as an indictment of the MCC approach. And I think we can all agree that MCC is pursuing a strategy long overdue in the United States, foreign assistance, identifying those countries that are well governed and permitting them to craft a development strategy tailored to their own needs and supporting them as they seek to lift their people from poverty through economic growth. MCC cannot and should not replace traditional foreign assistance, but it is a powerful and necessary tool for the United States to fight poverty around the world. And Mr. Chairman, I think it's important for us to look very carefully at MCC and our entire U.S. foreign assistance delivery system, because I fear there has been a lack of effective leadership over this avowed pillar of U.S. foreign policy. But I think there are a great deal of positive lessons to draw from the successes of the MCC, and I hope we can support it as it works to strengthen and expand its efforts. And I think its original concept and direction are promising, and I hope the MCC's future efforts will bring many, many more successes. But I also think there are larger questions to address here. Foreign assistance is America's tool for reducing poverty and giving people around the world the tools for improving themselves, their communities, and their own countries. We do not give foreign aid simply because we are generous. We do it because the reduction of widespread poverty makes America safer, and it's the right thing to do. We give foreign aid because hungry, desperate people are more likely to blame us for their problems and because people who see the United States as a tangible force for good are less likely to do us harm. In this way, foreign aid is a key component of a comprehensive U.S. national security strategy, every bit as important as our investment in military power. But we have not been doing our duty to make this investment really work. And I think there's been an appalling lack of the leadership from our administration. When the President sold us on the MCC in the beginning, he promised us that the MCC would be funded with additional dollars and would not rob from existing foreign aid programs. Unfortunately, this has not been the case. And so when MCC gets criticized, I think it's the wrong place to place the criticism, and I believe that the administration bears responsibility for the current problems that our foreign assistance programs have at this time. And I would like to say clearly to them, you can't call for foreign assistance as a pillar of America's national security strategy and then fail to fund the resources to support it. So we really need to decide what is important to us. Would we rather have a robust set of institutions to advance our national security and fight global poverty, or do we want to keep shielding or shelling for the extension of the tax cuts that really drain our pool of resources? So we need to first ask ourselves that question: how are we going to fund this program that we promised would really help poverty around the globe? So these are questions, Mr. Chairman, that I think this hearing will start to open up, and I hope that we will have the answers and we can really fulfill our commitment and the concept of MCC. Thank you so much, and I yield back my time.
I thank the gentlelady for her most eloquent statement. We are also joined this afternoon by another senior member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and my dear friend and colleague, the gentleman from California, Congressman Rohrabacher. Do you have an opening statement?
Very short, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to be listening with intently to this hearing, and especially about what's going on in Vanuatu. I have firsthand knowledge of Vanuatu, and let me notice.
The gentleman yield, I think probably only the two of us in this whole committee that knows where Vanuatu is and have been to Vanuatu personally.
I think that's probably correct. I have not been a fan of foreign aid over the years, and the Millennium Challenge account has been an attempt, at least a reasonable attempt, to try to set standards so that money that we use will in some way be put to good use, where other times I have seen, over the 30 years that I've been in Washington, I've seen money provided that has absolutely no results that you can see at all. And I notice that people are suggesting to hear that our aid to Vanuatu doesn't impact the ordinary people, but impacts the tourists industry and the transportation industry. It says, but in fact, in Vanuatu, from what my memory serves me correct, we're talking about a major part of their economy when you're talking about transportation and tourism. So I'd be very interested in hearing the testimony today. I think it's important for us not just to hand over money to people, which really does go into a black hole, but to set standards. And I'd like to see what the Millennium Challenge account is doing in terms of Vanuatu, and I think it's a very interesting case study. So I'll be happy to listen today, and thank you for your leadership, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman for his statement. I think one of the frustrations that we've also borne over the years is criticism not only from the American public, the taxpayers, and the fact that at times we give foreign assistance to some countries very unstable, controlled by dictators, same ones that turn around and spit in our face. And I think this procedure that we're trying to follow in the provisions of this legislation and making sure countries that are poverty-stricken, countries that have real needs, and that we have measurements in making sure that money is properly spent. And I think this is what we're looking at conceptually as the basis of our not only providing this kind of legislation, but giving those in charge and implementing the compacts or the provisions of this law that we passed a couple of years ago, and hopefully that it will become a positive situation for our country. We have two excellent witnesses this afternoon, both gentlemen very prominent, and I must say, on behalf of the committee, I want to commend both of you gentlemen for the services that you render to our country and the capacities that you currently serve in the administration. Our first witness is Dr. David Goodnick, who is a medical doctor by profession and is currently serving as the Director of the International Affairs and Trade Division of the U.S. General Accounting Office. He served in this capacity now for the past 6 years, was formerly Director of Medical Services of the Peace Corps, still part of his responsibility, and with his medical background, also served as Director of the University Health Services, New York University, a graduate of Harvard University, and received his medical degree from the University of Rochester in New York, and been responsible for about 1,000 GAO reports that I have here listed. Dr. Goodnick, I really, really appreciate your taking the time and to come and share with us the results of your findings on this GAO report. The gentleman representing the Millennium Challenge Corporation is Mr. Rodney Bent, the Deputy Chief Executive Officer. Mr. Bent is currently as Deputy CEO, is an officer of the corporation and manages the day-to-day operations of the agency. Mr. Bent previously served the MCC's Vice President for Policy and International Relations. Mr. Bent has spent over 20 years in the Office of Management and Budget, so he does know something about budgeting and divvying out funding in that respect. Also has held the position of the Bankers Trust Company with the Department of Treasury. He received his MBA degree from Cornell University, a master's from the Fletcher School of Law. Served also for many years as a professional staff member of the House Appropriations Committee, where he recommended appropriations level and policies for the USAID programs, as well as the Export-Import Bank, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, and the U.S. Trade and Development Agency. And that's a mouthful. And I'm quite certain that both gentlemen will give us their professional judgments on this important issue that we're now considering this afternoon. So I would like to turn the time over now to Dr. Goodnick for his statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, I'm pleased to discuss GAO's analysis released today of the MCC Compact in Vanuatu. As you have well and thoroughly stated, Mr. Chairman, in March 2006, MCC established a 5-year, $66 million compact with Vanuatu, its only compact in the Pacific. At $317 per capita, this is by far MCC's largest compact on a per capita basis. Today, I will briefly discuss two issues. First, MCC's analysis and portrayal of the compact's projected benefits, and second, risks that could affect the compact's projected results. Regarding projected benefits, MCC analyzed Vanuatu's proposal to repair and improve roads, bridges, and other infrastructure. They then projected benefits from improved transportation, construction spending, and the growth in tourism and agriculture. MCC states that the compact will have a transformational impact on Vanuatu's economic development. MCC's due diligence was generally sound. However, its portrayal of compact benefits does not accurately reflect its own underlying analysis and suggests impacts far greater than its own data support. The clearest example of this problem is MCC's portrayal of projected per capita income. MCC states that as a result of the compact, per capita income will increase by 15%, or $200 by 2010, and 37%, or $488 by 2015. However, as the poster here on my right illustrates, MCC's underlying data show that these figures represent the sum of yearly gains in per capita income rather than actual gains. This poster is also figure 5 in my full statement. MCC actually projects income gains of $51 per person in 22, not the $200 they have put in all public documents. The underlying data and analysis are not publicly available, have not been presented to Congress or other interested parties. MCC has also stated that the compact will result in a 3% increase in GDP each year. However, its underlying data project a one-time 3% rise in GDP, with the growth rate remaining essentially at its baseline after 2007. MCC also states that the compact is expected to benefit approximately 65,000 poor, rural individuals, but does not indicate the proportion of total compact benefits that will accrue to the rural poor. I don't want to suggest, as has been implied, that the percentage of benefits going to business and to the entrepreneurial sector is inappropriate or wrongheaded in any ways. Rather, the issue is the disclosure and the explanation of the benefits that will accrue and to whom. Finally, we identified 5 key risks that could affect the compact's results. First, MCC's construction cost estimates may not be sufficient. Second, projected benefits will likely accrue more slowly than MCC projects. Third, infrastructure maintenance is not fully developed as a risk. Fourth, projected growth in tourism and agriculture may be overly optimistic. And fifth, time saved in transit on improved roads is a social good, but may not result in measurable economic activity as MCC expects. Accounting for these risks, the compact benefits may be well below MCC's projections. In summary, Mr. Chairman, we are concerned about the gap between MCC's public statements about compact benefits and its underlying data and analysis. MCC's portrayal, for example, of per capita GDP gains can be understood only by analyzing, and it's a rather detailed analysis, of supporting source documents and spreadsheets which are not publicly available. This is not a semantic discussion. This is an issue of transparency and ultimately of MCC's credibility. These gaps could lead to unrealistic expectations within Vanuatu and among other interested parties. MCC also takes a risk in suggesting that its compact will achieve sustainable growth in Vanuatu at a level that no other donor has ever achieved. Further, these gaps raise questions about other compacts' projections of transformative impacts. Accurate representation of its compact's projected benefits will be key to MCC's credibility in future years. We are recommending that MCC fix its public reporting of the Vanuatu Compact, determine if similar statements have been made in other compacts, and refine its analysis to more fully account for project risks. In response, MCC has characterized its own portrayal as misleading, but stated, 1, that it had no intention to mislead, and 2, its portrayal is factually correct and consistent with the underlying data. Regarding the former, we did not determine how this gap was created, but I do not in any way want to imply that MCC intended to mislead. In fact, nothing in my experience to date with MCC would suggest that these statements were made misleading in an intentional way. However, on the latter point, MCC's portrayal can be considered accurate and transparent only if Congress, the people of Vanuatu, and other interested parties were to know that it represents, for example, cumulative income and growth over 5 years. However, MCC's public statements to date would leave an observer to just the opposite conclusion. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my remarks. I'm happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Goodnick. Mr. Bent, please defend yourself.
Thank you. Chairman Valia-Mavega, Mr. Burton, Mr. Rohrabacher, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to describe our work in Vanuatu and talk about some of these issues. I'm submitting a full statement for the record and would like to just highlight a few points from it.
Have you been to Vanuatu, Mr. Bent?
Nope. The closest I've been is Timor-Leste.
Okay, so you've actually never been there?
No.
Okay,
No, I haven't.
thank you.
I thought, however, I might start off with a commentary from one of the ministers in Vanuatu who said, "This program is vital to Vanuatu and a role model of aid effectiveness for other donors." So if I could start off by pleading that our number one client here thinks we're actually doing a good job. Today's hearing is titled...
For $65 million, yeah, I would...
Well, yes, hopefully it will be transformative. Today's hearing is titled, "Is the Millennium Challenge Corporation Overstating Its Impact, the Case of Vanuatu?" We are not. We respectfully disagree with the opinion that we are overstating MCC's impact in Vanuatu. MCC is reducing poverty by stimulating economic growth in Vanuatu. And even though GAO's portrayal of the Vanuatu Compact's expected impact reflects a different interpretation of MCC's analysis in some cases, the bottom line is that the program there will significantly benefit the country's poor. GAO's own analysis using MCC's underlying data supports this conclusion. As an innovative and progressive model for development assistance, MCC has awarded grants, what we call compacts, to 13 countries worldwide, totaling nearly $3.9 billion to reduce poverty through sustainable economic growth. One of those compacts is for over $65 million with the South Pacific nation of Vanuatu. It was the people of Vanuatu who decided that costly and unreliable transportation is an impediment to poverty reduction and economic growth. About 70% of the Ni Vanuatu working population are farmers or in the tourist-related industry. It's no coincidence that Vanuatu's compact, therefore, invests in 11 infrastructure projects, including roads, wharves, an airstrip, and warehouses, to reduce transportation costs and improve access to transportation services. Poor farmers can get more of their fruits, vegetables, and other crops to market with less damage, and they can command higher prices. Tourists can access Vanuatu's beaches and vacation sites more easily, creating demand for labor in hotels, restaurants, transportation companies, artisan stores, and shops. And although this was not part of our calculation, students can get to schools more quickly, patients can get to healthcare clinics more quickly. In fact, one of the consultations we held was with leaders of women's groups, and they pointed out that pregnant women, frankly, leave a month or two before they're due to get to the hospital because the transportation system is so bad in Vanuatu. So we didn't count any of those kind of costs in our economic analysis, but they are a true benefit. While both MCC and GAO agree that Vanuatu's compact will help the Ni Vanuatu tackle their constraints to poverty reduction and economic growth, benefiting the poor and positively transforming the economy, GAO's audit report questions the degree of expected benefits. We welcome GAO's analysis of MCC, most particularly its focus on the beneficiaries. The long and short of MCC's mission is reducing poverty through economic growth. The more agencies, think tanks, and universities analyze and discuss the benefits of MCC compacts, the better. MCC is absolutely committed to operating openly and transparently. We're happy to share our data, our assumption, and our methodologies with a broad audience. In the case of Vanuatu, we gave the GAO something over 400 documents and 10,000 pages of material, spreadsheets, analysis, you name it. Our goal is clarity. We will strive to avoid any ambiguity in official language in future documentation and to avoid any possible misinterpretation. We appreciate the 2 weeks the GAO spent in Vanuatu validating over a year's worth of our work in the island nation, and with the purpose and professionalism, we welcome discussing the details and the expected impact of the program. What are the facts? As Yogi Berra is supposed to have said, it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. What we know is that at least 65,000 Ni Vanuatu rural poor, more than 1/3 of the country's population, will benefit from our program. They're mostly subsistence farmers and laborers making an average of $1 to $2 a day. Income distribution in Vanuatu, compared to most developing countries, is highly unequal. Vanuatu ranks 111th on a list of 124 countries ranked by income inequality. If you're in the city, you tend to be better off. If you're out in the rural areas, you tend to be pretty poor. In areas where MCC is investing, cash incomes range from $300 to $1,000 compared to more than $2,500 in the capital. The transportation projects MCC is making possible will benefit a wide spectrum of Ni Vanuatu. Everyone will benefit, but the poor will benefit disproportionately. With respect to the number of beneficiaries, GAO believes that 65,000 is too high a count. GAO believes that households living away from roads or on smaller islands off the coast of the main island should not be counted as beneficiaries. Yet, considerable professional judgment and experience tell us that those households are still connected to the greater economy of Vanuatu, and MCC-funded roads will make those connections all the more vibrant, growth-enhancing, and beneficial. Footnote on page 10 of my written testimony provides some of the sources for our judgment. In short, with $66 million we're investing through the compact today, we are generating nearly $124 million in future benefits, which in a present value calculation roughly translates into nearly $600 for every Ni Vanuatu. These benefits may seem modest to you and me, but they give a crucial leg up to a typical rural Ni Vanuatu family of 5 that spends the bulk of its meager income on food, shelter, transportation, education, and health care. Business owners, tourism operators, and other participants in the economy who live above the poverty line will also benefit, that's clear. It's their investments, however, that are going to drive sustainable growth creation and job creation over the long run. The MCC point estimate of the Vanuatu Compact's expected impact was purposefully in the middle range of possible estimates so as not to overstate benefits. Our methodology is consistent with standard practices and explained in detail in my written statement. MCC projects are subjected to rigorous cost-benefit analysis to determine whether the bang for the buck is sufficiently high to merit funding. 11 of the 26 projects proposed by Vanuatu met that threshold, and only those 11 are being funded. In other words, we rejected 15 projects. Our model and methodology allow us to move forward with the signing of a compact in the first place only if the impact can be substantiated. The analysis confirms and supports that the program in Vanuatu will transform the lives of the poor in a sustainable way and will ensure that our investment of U.S. taxpayer dollars will deliver tangible, measurable benefits as it is beginning to do. Like every other development agency, MCC acknowledges that basic income data at the household level is often scarce and unreliable in the poorest countries with whom we partner. Therefore, MCC has made a strong commitment to improving the quality of the data in our partner countries and has funded baseline surveys in all of our compact countries. This helps us measure the impact of MCC investments and track interim progress toward compact goals. In several cases, these surveys are being used by the governments and other donors for purposes beyond compact projects. MCC stands by the projected impact of the Vanuatu Compact, and we're proud of the work we're doing there, not only in Vanuatu, but also in 26 other countries, threshold and compact programs, in which we're working. We are pioneering among foreign assistance programs in many ways, including the degree to which we make public our criteria for estimating program impact. We look forward to measuring the actual benefits of this investment once poor farmers can get their crops to market and a broader swath of the population can participate in the economy. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and members of the subcommittee for your interest in the Millennium Challenge Corporation, and I certainly welcome your questions.
I don't want to tip the scale in suggesting that I stand in favor of Mr. Bent's testimony this afternoon, but I do want to share with my colleagues an island country population of about 207,000 people, 83 islands. So if you want to talk about infrastructure, where it's not like driving a car from here to Richmond, Virginia, just to give that sense of perspective about these are some of the unique features of a country like Vanuatu out there in the Pacific, and I would highly recommend that my colleagues we should go to Vanuatu and see if our $65 million investment was worth the effort. My good friend, Mr. Indiana, for his...
I'd like to go
Mr.
with you.
Burton
How long does it take to get there?
You don't want to know.
Just to answer that, we've got staff who've gone there, and I'm told it's 29 hours door to door.
29 hours.
And not even counting the wait in between for flight connections, if you can find them.
Right.
Thank you. Mr. Burton.
I just have a few questions. First of all, I appreciate the testimony of both of you. I understand there's a divergence of opinion there. It's pretty obvious. What I want to find out is when economists, and I guess this is for you, Mr. Bent, when economists and development professionals speak of so-called MCC effect, what are they talking about? And then what case examples in Vanuatu and elsewhere can you share with us to illustrate that the MCC model is having substantial benefits even before the first spade of dirt is turned on a number of those infrastructure projects that are being funded under the program? You may have already alluded to some of this already, but
No, I think it's a great question because it's one of the core benefits of the MCC. Because countries are competing for our resources, they do extraordinary things. I'll give you the example in Vanuatu where they have agreed to set up a road maintenance fund. They've increased it by 60%, largely because they know we wouldn't fund their roads unless they agree to do the maintenance. Vanuatu, when it was picked probably about 3 years ago, was in the median, just above the median on a whole group of indicators like corruption, government effectiveness. These are all indicators done by third parties, not done by us, but by the World Bank Institute, Heritage, you name it. Right now, Vanuatu is pretty much in the 90th percentile. They failed regulatory quality in 2004 when they picked. Now they're in the 99th percentile. These countries have every incentive to do things, not just Vanuatu either. In the Dominican Republic, for example, which is right now not one of our countries, but they have set up 3 commissions dealing with our criteria and ruling justly, investing in people and economic freedom to try and meet our criteria. Because we look at immunization rates, they've offered 5 million shots for measles as a way of getting that number up, as a way of appealing to us in terms of what we do. We've got reams of economists. I could probably cite ambassadors who come in, but that's probably their job to say these kinds of things. But in fact, I think there is a very positive, very visible, very tangible MCC effect.
let me ask one other question. You said you've never been down to Vanuatu. Who has?
We actually send quite a number of people there.
No, I just like to know, because I know you police, and the GAO's been down there, but I know you police the funds that are given.
Oh, yes, we have a resident country advisor in Vanuatu. All of the compacts, after we sign a compact, we put our eyes and ears on the ground, or a resident country director. Sometimes we have 2 of them. But frankly, we send a lot of staff to Vanuatu. A couple of our staff, an infrastructure engineer, and our general counsel's office just returned from Vanuatu a couple of days ago.
Well, this is probably an elementary question, but in a place as strung out as this island nation, how do you police all these programs, and how do you get around? I mean, I can see, I can see. Yeah. How you could get to Ifat, is that the capital? That's the capital island? Portobello? This is the capital. Yeah,
Port Vila is the capital.
And you go all the way up to Santo, Port City up there. I mean, as I look at this, that's, you're looking at 200 or 300 miles over the ocean.
Right. Well, we're only working on 8 of the 83 islands, so that makes our job a little easier. But in fact, we hire a pretty energetic and rigorous crew, people who've generally lived in the country or have experience in the region before we hire them to go out there.
But you do, I won't belabor this, but you do have a very strong policing operation to make sure the funds, because you were talking about corruption earlier, and that is one of our major concerns in foreign affairs and foreign policy and foreign aid.
It absolutely is. We hire a procurement agent, we hire a fiscal agent, we do audits twice a year, we have our eyes and ears on the ground. We certainly spend a lot of time talking with civic organizations, businesses, labor unions, farmers, you name it, we talk to people.
Okay. Well, I'll let the chairman and my colleague from California continue the questioning, and I'm sure they'll have questions for you, Mr. Goodnick.
Thank the gentleman. I just want to note our ambassador accredited to Fiji is also our ambassador to Vanuatu, and he's also accredited to Tuvalu, to Tonga. And so I'm sure that our embassy in Fiji is one of our primary resources that assists the MCC.
How big an area is the ambassador?
About the gentleman's question about our embassy in Fiji is accredited to about 5 island nations within that area near Fiji. So if you start paddling your canoe, maybe today you might get there next week, assuming that there's wind and you might use a sail. But they are beautiful islands, and I hope my good friend will come with me one day to visit these islands. Gentleman from California for his questions.
Yes, just for the edification of my colleague from Indiana, that he comes from, of course, a landlocked state. He needs to hear this. I know he's going through a briefing right now at this moment. But, Mr. Burton, just for your edification, I know Indiana, it doesn't touch on an ocean, and I think there might be a river that flows through it or something.
We also have some lakes.
A couple lakes, right.
Would the gentleman yield?
Certainly.
Down here.
Oh, yes.
Most important, it's right next to Ohio, which is really critical and very important.
Another
So-
landlocked
That's enough
state.
of that.
Okay. Let me note that I do remember Vanuatu very well, and I've been there a number of times, actually. But I do remember about 30 years ago, in the middle of the jungle in Espiritu Santo, on one of those roads or paths that I hope that you have now improved, laying underneath a motorcycle that I had been in a motorcycle accident. I'd been out in the jungle riding a motorcycle and ended up pinned under that motorcycle. Now, I would hope that one of the projects has something to do with improving the roads there on that island. I imagine it does, and because I imagine other people, rather than just people like myself, have been in such circumstances. Also, just for the edification of my friend, I was about to say that this, if you read Adventures in the South Pacific, Espiritu Santo happens to be the island that Michener was stationed on during the Second World War, and you can see Bali High over there, and I think it's Aruba is the island, I believe. What is the name of Bali High? What's the name of the island? What's the name of the island in that chain that was the model for Bali High?
If the gentleman will yield, I believe it was the island of Bora Bora that James Mitchell.
This is island jealousy here
But
coming out.
Bali is one of the islands, of course, in Indonesia.
Yeah, no,
That
but
was bombed recently by terrorists.
But from Espiritu Santo, where Michener was, you can see that island and the silhouette of that island. So we actually have a long history there. I would hope also that the Millennium Challenge account took into account that there are a number of potential airports. For example, on the Espiritu Santo, which my father flew in and out of Espiritu Santo during the Second World War, there are a number of very fine runways that are still left from the Second World War, which is 60 years ago. So there is some great potential in these islands. However, it is about as isolated as they get. Now to the question at hand in terms of the Millennium Challenge account. Let me note, Mr. Burton, that if this gentleman had been there and had been there a number of times to check that out, that would have been the money necessary for that trip would have actually been taken from the account that was set aside to help the people of the islands. So there is something to say about not having too many trips to the islands and not having too many people watching the pot, because then the stew that goes into the pot is diminished by that amount of money, because it costs a lot of money to fly down to those islands, and it's a lot of money per trip. I do think that your resident country director must have a wonderful job, and I plan sometime Innie and I will go down there, and I'm sure he will be wearing a straw hat and shorts
And he'd be happy to show you all around.
and sandals, etc. I was satisfied with your testimony today. I think we have a bookkeeping debate going on here, and but I will watch, Mr. Chairman, because of this hearing. I will watch very closely what happens in Vanuatu with that, and does the $65 million actually impact positively on the lives of these people, because they are in a very poor situation. Although they're happy and wonderful people, they live in a very poor condition. And if we, with some type of directed investment, I was very impressed with your testimony that because of the Millennium Challenge account challenge that they on their own have raised their standards, that in and of itself is a great accomplishment. And so it's not just as much pumping in money as it is giving people the incentive to have the right policies which will permit that type of economic growth that benefits people's lives. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate this hearing.
Thank the gentleman for his comments, and I just want to add also the fact that we've already committed $3.9 billion to these 13 countries, and we're looking at Vanuatu with 65 million. I would kindly suggest to my colleagues is let's not look at Vanuatu as the example of failure. I cannot stress the importance of this hearing because we're planting the seed now in exactly how we're going to go about in making sure that the measurements and the standards that we're applying, the statutory requirements that we're making and giving Mr. Bent and the others the job to do, that we don't penalize the efforts to make sure that we fully address the needs of the poor people living in this one particular country. So my suggestion is that looking at a project worth $830 million versus a project that is only 65, and we're just so picky about every penny. When you're looking at the fact that $309 billion in other countries, among the other 12 countries, I just hope my colleagues will not be critical of Vanuatu's case in suggesting that there's a lot of hanky-panky going on here, or corruption or whatever it is, but that truly the 65,000 people who are poverty-stricken, and the fact that if an infrastructure development is needed, this is what they requested, and they're able to follow up on the requirements that we've set in these compacts. And I sincerely hope that we're looking at progress in that respect. My good friend, the gentleman from Ohio, for his questions.
Thank you very much. I'll be brief, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for holding this hearing. I apologize for just getting here recently. I had 2 other hearings that I've just come from. Just one question. The concern that I've always had with the Millennium Challenge account, and I certainly agree with the goals and the criteria that, for rule of law and economic freedom and investing in people and all the things that are required in order to qualify for this additional funding on top of the foreign aid dollars that we already give. My principal concern is all the foreign aid money that we give, we ought to only give it if the countries are agreeable to doing those particular things, as opposed to having this pot on top of everything else and saying we're really going to require these things to be done in these cases, but not really enforcing it in all the rest of the foreign aid, which is much more than this small pot, relatively small pot, in comparison with all the aid that we give, that is the Millennium Challenge account. So could you, either one of you gentlemen, if you would like to comment on that, I would be happy to.
Let me just say a couple of words. One, I think the principles behind the Millennium Challenge, meaning selection criteria, attention to results, measuring things along the way, making sure that you've delivered what you say you've delivered, are principles that probably everybody in the U.S. foreign aid establishment wants to see done. Ambassador Danilovich has had a couple of conversations with Ms. Fore, the nominee to be the aid administrator. She's very interested in what we do and how we do it. So we're hopeful that, in fact, good practices will be used more universally. I'll also say, frankly, we've had a lot of other donors, including some surprising countries, come to us and say, well, exactly how are you doing this? What do you measure this way? And where do you get your criteria from, and why do you use third parties? So those are all positive things. I'd certainly let Secretary of State or the aid administrator explain what their plans for the future are.
Mr. Gooding, did you have any comment?
Yes, I'd say that there are actually a number of points of agreement between Mr. Bent and myself, and I want to make sure we don't fail to acknowledge them. First is that the underlying premise of MCC is a sound one, and one that may yield significant results. Secondly, with respect to Vanuatu, we agree that the selection of projects is a rational one. It's consistent with the Asia Development Bank. It's consistent with the national development strategies of the Vanuatu people. It was proposed by the Vanuatu people. Where we disagree, and disagree significantly, is on the issue of the portrayal and the significance of the problem with which the portrayal was made, and also on some of the risks associated. Let me offer you an example. And I need to rebut respectfully the notion that this is a bookkeeping issue. If, Mr. Chairman, you earn $100,000, and I tell you I'm going to transform your income is going to be 15% higher in 5 years than it is today. And everything I tell you in every document and everything I've told the Congress tells you that your income is going to be 15% higher than it is today. You have every right to believe your income will be $115,000 in real terms 5 years hence. In fact, it took us wading through that 1,000 pages of documents that Mr. Bent alluded to realize and determine that actually the benefits you will receive are 4%, and your income will be slightly less than $104,000 in real terms 5 years hence. So the lack of transparency to us gets at a credibility issue. That is not a bookkeeping issue. And then the last thing I would say is with respect to the risks that were considered. For example, when I spoke about induced benefits being realized in the short term, MCC's calculation of benefits is that the minute they cut the ribbon on these projects, they achieve a high rate of induced benefits. So agriculture and tourism are poised and ready to respond and will respond nearly maximally the day the ribbon is cut. And we project, as do the World Bank and many others, that benefits from building a road to tourism and agriculture must ramp up over a number of years. And this affects significantly the projections. So again, the points of agreement, premise of MCC is sound. The selection of the projects is sound. There's a significant credibility gap in the portrayal.
Yield back. Yeah, I'd yield to the gentleman from Indiana.
Yeah, real briefly, as I understand it, there's not, according to the GAO, there's not fraud or, I mean, you're not alluding to the possibility that there's fraud or malfeasance or anything. You're just saying that what they're telling us is overstated.
What they've told.
And let me just follow up. And so what I'd like to ask you is, if that's the big difference, that they're overstating things and their success, and it's really not fraud or abuse or any criminal activity or corruption on the part of local officials, then what I don't understand is if it's overstated or isn't, the money's being put to a good use and it's being used for the purpose for which it was intended. So the big difference is the projections that you're talking about. Is that right?
Well, 2 points. One, they have overstated, they've portrayed the results in a misleading way to you, to the Vanuatu people, and to all parties who may be interested in the results of these efforts. Secondly, with respect to the money being put to good use, in actual fact, there has been about $1.7 million dispersed in Vanuatu to date on the $65 million project. And the Inspector General, as of earlier in this year, found that about $100,000 had actually been vouchered. So a year or more into the project, they are at about 16% of the money they had planned to spend. So there are issues with respect to the rate at which the project is proceeding, and there's a statutory 5-year deadline on MCC compacts.
Could I address some of those points?
Yeah.
First,
It's up to you. You have
sorry.
time.
Let me respond to the difference about annual and cumulative. I think, well, starting off by saying that actually we have a great relationship with the GAO. They wouldn't spend so much time with us if they didn't like us. Frankly, we welcome all of the oversight that they've done. It helps us sharpen our case so that, in some manner, I think it's appropriate that the GAO should say, well, wait a minute, you're talking about cumulative impact. If somebody says to me, I'm going to give you $1,000, I don't sit down and say, oh, gee, I'm going to give you $1,000, but it's really in $50 increments over a period of time. And that was in the spirit of how we wrote it. I think that one of the questions where we need to do a better job is clearly explaining to the beneficiaries the number of beneficiaries. I'm reminded a little bit of Harry Truman, who said he wanted a one-armed economist because they kept saying on the one hand and on the other hand. When you're estimating out 20 years, we're building a lot of calculations on a lot of assumptions about a lot of things that we don't know very well. Take the $65,000 beneficiary figure. That, in fact, is an 8-year-old figure. I'm willing to bet that there are probably a lot more people living out there than the 65,000. But we didn't try to say, well, let's say the growth rate is 2.4%, and let's add this onto it, and pile on uncertainty on uncertainty. On the slow disbursement, one reason it's slow is that we fired the procurement agent because he wasn't doing the job we thought he needed to do. Our goal is to spend the money well. It's not to spend it hastily. It's to do a good job. We want to be able to show not only the people of Vanuatu, but the American taxpayer that he's getting fair value for the money. So we're going to do this in as rigorous and thoughtful and a way as we possibly can.
Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman from Ohio for his statement and questions. I think it seems to me that the problem that we're faced with here is a matter of interpretation of the federal statute and whatever standards that the Congress has set forth for which the MCC takes its walking or orders in terms of how you can best implement the provisions of the Millennium Challenge account legislation. My understanding is that these three performance criteria are the basis of how the MCC goes about in establishing compacts with now 13 countries. The criteria of ruling justly, I guess you're talking about a transparent government, somehow that you're not dealing with a dictatorship and situations like that. The next criteria is investment in people, that whether or not this economic assistance given to this country goes directly to the benefit economically of the people, whether they're poor or whatever it is that the country feels is most urgent for the development and the funding that we provide for that country. And the third criteria is economic freedom. I suspect that here again is a matter of interpretation. What does it mean by economic freedom? As Mr. Bend, you've alluded to earlier, is that you're doing a cumulative economic overview of what happens to Vanuatu, and you're suggesting the GAO's conducting somewhat of an audit report in more specific terms and not really looking at the overall picture. Am I getting the right frame of mind in terms you two gentlemen are differing in expressing this, and you come up with different results? And I want to say that another question I want to pose to Mr. Gutnick, are we doing similar studies of the GAO on 12 other countries that are currently implementing its compacts with the MCC? Because obviously just one country, but I'd like to do a little more than to see if there's a common thread on however the MCC's performance is, it a case by case, or MCC's being consistent in applying these standards so that every country applying will know what to expect from them, rather than Vanuatu given a different case as opposed to the 12 other countries. Dr. Gutnick.
Chairman Lantos has asked us to review other compacts. He asked us indeed to look at Vanuatu first, I believe, because he had a concern about the results that were portrayed when the congressional notification was put forward.
And I also note for the record that there was a recent academic study made in Australia by a group there challenging the MCC's funding or how it rated Vanuatu, and made the suggestion that the countries like Samoa, Fiji, Kiribati, and Tuvalu had greater success in raising the per capita income or whatever the economic status as compared to Vanuatu. And I'll say that some of the leaders of these island nations complained to me. They seem to have been disqualified for some reason or another, or maybe they haven't properly submitted the paperwork for their applications. Am I?
No, we look at every country. Nobody really, in fact, applies. What we do is, whether they want to or not, we look at them, we rate them, we put everything up on our website. I don't specifically remember how some of those countries come off. Some countries like Samoa, in fact, do meet some of the criteria, but Samoa, by World Bank lights, or our lights rather, is a lower middle income country. Our legislation has a cap of 25% on what we can do in lower middle income countries. So we try to focus on the poorer countries.
So Samoa is not as poor as Vanuatu? Is that why they were disqualified? Right. I see.
Well, not so much that they're disqualified, but they're a bit better off than Vanuatu. I think I've got a chart in my longer testimony that shows the relative incomes of several countries.
I'd like for you to submit that for the record to Mr. Bent.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to know from day one how many and just to see if, in terms of poverty levels of each country.
Sure.
I'm sure the United
course.
Nations has similar data, but I
Right.
think it would be very helpful. I want to build a record on this because, as I said, this hearing is very important on how we're going to be looking at how the whole millennial account legislation is being implemented. And I think it's quite obvious from the perspective of the members here, we just don't want to waste Uncle Sam's money, put it in those terms. And secondly, we don't want a bureaucratic confrontation of doing here, and then you end up the bureaucrats fighting among themselves, and the intent of the funding that is to be provided to these countries come to an end. And I think that defeats the very purpose of what we're trying to achieve here. Dr. Goodnick?
I agree very strongly with what you've said. I do think, though, that the issue here is one of transparency and ultimately of credibility. 5 years hence, MCC will be held to a standard of the results that it's portraying and projecting today. And if at that time in Vanuatu, even if the project succeeded and all went well, they would not have achieved the results that they are portraying today, their credibility will be significantly challenged. I'd encourage anyone here to go to their website today and look at Vanuatu, look under the banner of Vanuatu, and see what you interpret to be the projected results of this compact, and ask yourself if that's transparent, credible, good governance.
But I think the problem here, Dr. Goodnick, is that who makes the judgment in saying that the government is transparent enough to be a recipient of this award? I just noticed that there was a vote of no confidence of the present Prime Minister in Vanuatu, I believe. And so does this automatically put a whole dark cloud in suggesting that the compact does not move forward at the expense of the people in poverty? Thousands of them could be beneficiaries to what the whole compact was intending to achieve here?
Right. The transparency I refer to is the transparency of our government, of the Millennium Challenge Corporation. You are very correct that the issue of transparency in the government of Vanuatu is key, and it is one that, again, there's a point of agreement between ourselves and Millennium Challenge Corporation, that they look at the 16 indicators, they get objective data. It's imperfect data, but it's the best data that's out there, and they do a rigorous analysis by some predetermined criteria as to who's eligible for their assistance.
My question to Mr. Bent, am I to understand that the standards that you've implemented with the Vanuatu Compact is exactly the same standards that you're implementing to the 12 other countries?
Right.
That have been recipients of the $3.9 billion that
all the countries go through the same rigorous selection process. All the projects go through the same economic and, frankly, environmental and social and gender analysis to make sure that we're really doing the right thing. I think, to emphasize one point of agreement with Dr. Goodnick, we think that our beneficiaries need to know. And so, therefore, what we want to make sure we're doing with them is saying, this is what we're agreed on doing. Do you agree? Yes. And then we go forward.
I think the other concern here, as it was raised also by other members of this committee, why Vanuatu was selected among all the countries in the Pacific. Was Vanuatu a member of the Coalition of the Willing during the war? Was there any real special political treatment given to Vanuatu? Why Vanuatu's application was accepted and several others that were submitted and were rejected? What put Vanuatu as the shining example of how the MCC could best apply its...
Vanuatu was in that first group of 16 countries that were picked. They passed 13 out of the 16 indicators. They were a low-income country. In fact, since then, they've done even better. So I think for all 4 years they've been eligible, they've met the criteria. So that was it, long and short. I'd asked the question because I'd heard that there had been a notion that somehow this was a political reward. The closest thing I can find, frankly, is I think the then foreign minister who said he didn't approve of the invasion. So if we're rewarding our friends through the MCC, it's not a very
Well, I'm glad you've stated that clearly for the record, because I do not want to have this sense that some members of the committee believe that the reason why Vanuatu was awarded this is because the administration wanted to award those countries who were members of the Coalition of the Willing.
They're in on their merits. Nothing else matters.
Are there, Dr. Gutnick and both of you, Mr. Bent as well, do you see any problems with the current legislation or the law that implements the provisions of the law as it is within the millennial compacts? I mean, what I want to know is that obviously there's the problems of interpretation that's come out from the GAO, and also the problem of how the MCC has gone about implementing these provisions.
Sure.
Do you suggest any provisions of the current law that we ought to address and make it more transparent on our part, so that there could be no questions, so that GAO doesn't have to, wonder too, was this correct, the way the MCC was implementing this provision or that provision? I would be very appreciative if to offer any recommendations that you'd like to make, because Congress doesn't necessarily do the best thing or the right thing all the time. And if there are weaknesses in the current law, and how, in other words, giving you more heartaches and problems and trying to figure, well, what do they really mean? And then maybe we won't have as many GAO audits or whatever it is in implementing the provision of this law.
There are a couple of provisions that I think we'd welcome changes in the current authorizing statute. One is that right now we can't do concurrent compacts. In other words, we couldn't go back to Vanuatu and have a second compact. What we've learned is that for that MCC incentive effect, and especially when we create an accountable entity in each of these countries, there are real economies of scale that we could take advantage of. So point one would be getting a concurrent compact. Point two, this is probably not going to be the case in Vanuatu, but in some of our other countries, construction projects are highly uncertain. The costs do go up. David's quite correct about that. And sometimes it takes longer to do something. So having relief from the 5-year limitation that we've got now, perhaps doing a longer term. The third thing, and this applies directly to possibly eligible Pacific Island countries, is there a way that we could consider other mechanisms? And that might be appropriate. My own sense, frankly, is that the issue between GAO and the MCC over the beneficiaries is not a legal or an authorizing issue. It's an analytical issue in which respected professionals can frankly disagree. I never have seen headlines where you get the notion of MCC understates impact, crime to be prevented sort of headline. So I think that, in this particular case, we'll continue to have conversation. We want to do a better job of being transparent, but I don't think that's a question of the authorizing legislation.
One thing that I'm very much aware among most of these Pacific Island nations is their capacity. What I mean by this is having a sufficient number of professionals locally among the local people, doctors, lawyers, auditors, professional people. And I know that Vanuatu has a very close working relationship with Australia. And let me ask you a question. Were most of the people involved in transforming this application process was done in cooperation from expatriates who are CPAs, people who, or were they, let's say, predominantly Vanuatuans themselves that were part of the process?
It's the Ni Vanuatu who do it. It's church groups, women's groups, farmers.
No. What I mean is that the actual professional people that understand economics and how this whole paperwork is being filled. What I'm saying, how many expatriates were involved in the process of developing this compact? And I'm talking about good professional people. I'm not knocking this, suggesting that it was a bad thing. But my point is that a lot of times, when it comes to application times, leaders of these governments rely a lot to expatriates who are contracted to do the work for them, simply because there aren't enough experts among their own people to do the work.
Good question. If I can, let me answer it for the record.
Could you please? I would like to have you submit that for the record. Now, as you were discussing earlier about transparency, the problems that we're faced with the current legislation, would you think that there have to be different milestones or deadlines when you're looking at a country who's applying for an $800 million compact? versus a $65 million compact. I mean, nitpicking every little penny of the 65 millions, but $800 million is a little more involved, I'm quite sure. And I can't, you can't tell me that the paperwork is exactly the same.
I'm going to let David handle the nitpicking part.
Dr. Goodnick?
Well, as I understand the provisions of a compact as it operates, by and large, if you look at the compacts to date, they've hewed very closely to each other. So the compact with Benin or the compact with Mali looks very similar in its form to the compact with Vanuatu. I'm sure there are features that are unique, but by and large, the structures that are put in place to provide oversight at the country level, the requirements for disbursement of funds, the requirement for auditing of funds are quite similar.
I think the United Nations places a standard, what is considered at least development country, LDCs they call them. How many LDCs do we have currently right now in the world? Any hazard a guess? Can you submit that for the record, Mr. Bent? I'm very curious.
The UN Human Development Index, I think, looks at, 125, and they break them down into categories.
And Vanuatu's rate's 114th or something like that?
Well, that was a different statistic. Let me answer that for the record. We'd be happy to do that.
I would be very curious exactly. Now, would you think that among those countries that are categorized or labeled, I think by the United Nations, especially the World Bank and other regional institutions, that least developed countries are the ones that are considered poverty, the worst off, if you will?
Yes, sir.
And will these countries should have a higher priority for the MCC to look at for real help as far as meeting poverty problems that most of these countries are faced with?
We only work in lower middle income and lower income countries. What we ask, however, is that the countries show a demonstrated willingness to govern themselves wisely, to invest in their people, and to promote economic freedom. And not every country is going to do that. There are a couple that aren't much in favor of those things.
Well, here's a curveball I want to throw at both of you. We have currently under the statute a law that if there's a military coup that occurs in a country, we automatically put sanctions on that country. Okay, now I'm faced with a predicament here. 6 years ago, a general by the name of Musharraf committed a military coup in Pakistan. 6 years later, he still hasn't called elections. There's absolutely no democracy in Pakistan to this day, 6 years now. Fiji committed a military coup last year, and we immediately started putting sanctions on Fiji. And then I think also due to our total ignorance in understanding the cultural, social nuances that happen or developed in that country in terms of its very unique problems. Thailand also had a military coup that took place, and we also put sanctions in that country. In fact, Thailand had a history of about 14 coups even before that. And as far as I'm concerned, not only are we applying a double standard here, to me it's a height of hypocrisy. We're making demands that countries become democratic, and yet we allow Musharraf to continue his dictatorship rule simply because we're supposed to be working with him to fight terrorism. But other countries, because of their unique situations, we put sanctions on them because they're not fighting terrorism as much as Pakistan. So where's the fairness in our current rule of law? Does a country like Fiji qualify for the MCC compact, even though it's under a current military rule? Let me put it this way. Does Pakistan qualify for the MCC compact?
No, I was going to say that's probably, your question is a good one, but it's best directed at the Secretary of State, I'm afraid.
Well, I'm curious because we give a lot of assistance to Pakistan in the billions. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious if Pakistan has made application to take into the pot, with the $6 billion pot that we give here to give to countries that, and you can't tell me there's not enough poor people in Pakistan that need this assistance. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to present that to you, some of the problems that we're faced with legislatively and the unfairness of the process. The chairman of the committee had requested perhaps that GAO studies also be conducted in the among the other 12 countries. Dr. Gutnick, did I hear that? Or I'm going to certainly confer with him closely about doing this as well, because I don't think the GAO, is this the only GAO study that has been made among the 13 countries that currently have compacts with the MCC?
This is the only study of this nature that looks specifically at the underlying analysis that led to the projected economic impact in the way this has. We have looked at other compacts primarily to understand and examine the structures that were being established in country to begin to execute projects. In the first year of MCC's operations, we looked at some of their management structures internally as they were building the staff, the budget, and the internal controls to run the operation in Washington. And also early on, we did look at the eligibility criteria that has been discussed here in terms of the analysis that is undertaken with the raw data of the indicators to produce eligible countries. But yes, it is my understanding that Chairman Lantos, through his original request, had asked us to work on additional countries. What we intend to do is work closely with his staff to determine how they would want us to proceed at this point.
I had a recent meeting with about 4 prime ministers and heads of state from the Pacific Island nations who came to Washington. And this was one of the issues that was discussed about their qualification to apply for an MCC compact. And the concerns that were raised to me was the fact that they say, well, most of these countries are LDCs, and they still were not given the green light to say, you can go ahead and submit your application. And Samoa is one of those examples. I think it's still rated as an LDC. Mm-hmm. And you say they don't qualify because the per capita income is too high?
No, I was saying that they're a lower middle income country, and that in our legislation we have a cap of doing only 25% on lower middle income countries. So we can work in lower middle income countries. El Salvador is an example. But the amount of resources that we can provide to a country like Samoa would be legislatively constrained.
Why would that be? Why would that be?
I think the intent of the restriction was to make sure that we stayed focused on the poorest of the poor.
The poorest of the poor. If I let me ask: are there any provisions of the law, Mr. Bent, that is causing any problems in the administration or implementation of the statute where, as I've said earlier, the differences here are coming where the GAO has an entirely different perspective from how you're currently going about and implementing the provisions of the current law?
Not so much with respect to the issue that we talked about today. There are a couple of minor provisions involving the Federal Register or the terms of our board members that we'd like to have a discussion about.
Dr. Gutnick?
I agree with Rodney that the issues that are being put forward today don't have specific legislative implications for the authorizing for MCC's authorizing legislation. But again, we are of the opinion that full, honest, transparent disclosure to Congress and the Vanuatu people of what the results are being portrayed and projected is much more than nitpicking and indeed of great interest to the Congress.
Mr. Bent, the MCC and its operations, are you under the State Department in any way or form, or you serve as an independent corporation?
We're an independent corporation, but the Secretary of State is the chairman of our board. The aid administrator is a member of the board. Secretary of the Treasury is a member of the board. The U.S. Trade Representative is on the board as well. And we have, or will have, 4 private members. So that plus the CEO compose the 9 members.
Does the Secretary of State have all that time to commit herself and working as chairman of the MCC?
I can honestly say that she's been very involved in asking us sometimes some pretty tough and pointed questions about what we're doing and how we're doing it. So she is very, very much involved.
So there's no question that as far as the total overall operation and implementation of the MCC account under the State Department is part of our foreign policy.
We are subject to the foreign assistance restrictions, if you will, but in terms of day-to-day direction, no, we're an independent agency.
How does this differ from our current program, the USAID?
Well, AID is in some sense, through the new F process and everything else, integrated with what the State Department is doing. We share information with the Secretary of State, the State Department, AID. We want to know, for example, if they've had success in certain projects in certain countries. We certainly take advantage of everything USAID with its 50, 60 years worth of experience has done. But heck, we'll take advantage of what the MDBs have learned or NGOs or anybody. And I will say just that GAO has been helpful to us in terms of saying, well, hey, this could be misinterpreted, or did you really mean that? So we don't want to be defensive about criticism. We welcome it.
I am quite sure that this is the whole intent on Chairman Lantos' initiative also to have the GAO look into the process. Not that we're trying to point fingers at anybody to show how wrong that you're doing the program. I think the whole point here is if there are questions, if there's an even standard being applied to all those applicants, and do you consider 13 countries a pretty good tempo that we're operating under, or should have been more? Is it because of the slow process, that's all the paperwork that has to be done? Is there too much paper shuffling going on in this thing?
I think we have been pretty rigorous internally in saying, are we really asking countries for what doesn't reduce the risk? And so, for example, we've reduced our legal documentation by 2/3. We are forever looking at our processes and saying, is this really helpful? Does the country understand what we're about or not? There's always room for improvement. I will say that, I've been there about 18 months. I think there's been a sea change in what we've been doing. That said, I think the problems are in front of us. They're real. The issues of implementation are horrendous. Nobody in this business should have the least bit of hubris about what we can achieve and how we achieve it. As I say, that's why I welcome the GAO or think tanks or other people saying, well, heck, is this as clear as you could make it? If it's not, then we're going to do our darndest to make it clear.
Do you think that you would support a proposed amendment on the part of Chairman Lantos and myself that we say that we give LDCs, least developed countries, as the highest priority to be considered by the MCC? So that divides automatically, puts a division, say, okay, these are the most, because obviously this is where most of the poor people are.
Right.
Am I wrong on this?
No, sir. What I would ask, however, is that if you'd help us with our appropriations, because frankly, our biggest constraint is going to be funding, not the authorizing legislation. The President's request for 2008 was $3 billion. The House has given us a mark of $1.8 billion, which will pretty much allow us to do our job and not a lot more this year. The Senate has cut us to $1.2 billion. And at that level, we won't be able to do a number of compacts that we frankly
Well, you
had hoped to
realize
do.
that we've already expended about $650 billion in that terrible war we got ourselves in Iraq, that we're spending $2 billion a month, a month in that terrible war. So I think maybe perhaps the President needs to rethink his priorities in terms of exactly how we could best spend the American taxpayers' money in that regard. And I don't mean to question what you said about if you're going to make changes, you need to give us more money to operate. And understandably, every agency, excuse me, of the federal government asks for more money. Our challenge is to make sure that the American taxpayers' money is properly spent, and I know that that's your commitment as well.
Yes, it is.
My good friend, the gentlelady from California, for her questions.
Probably you have gone over this territory while I was out attending another meeting.
It never hurts to repeat the question, Madam Chair.
But I need to ask this. I have been in Vanuatu, and I was there while we were estimating whether MCA should become part of their governmental programs. And I want to know what obstacles that you have found to this point now. If it's already been asked, well, please repeat it for me. But what stands in the way for economic growth in Vanuatu, and which of them are most likely to and least likely to be addressed by our project, MCA?
Thank you, Ms. Watson. Also, let me thank you for your very kind comments on gender issues. You've been a terrific leader on this, and we appreciate it.
I am thrilled about what they're doing there
Well, thank
in
you.
Lesotho.
In the case of Vanuatu, the preeminent problem with respect to economic growth that the NI Vanuatu identified was transportation, roads, wharves, airstrip, warehouses. And so that's why this compact is entirely dedicated to dealing with those kinds of issues. There are clearly other problems. In every one of the countries in which we operate, capacity on the part of the local government and local society is a constraint. I don't want to suggest that an issue as complex as development is solvable just by putting in roads. You have to do a number of things. You have to have an effective government. You have to have an open economy. You need to do any number of things. But we're certainly part of the answer.
I'm very, very familiar with the problems that I lived them every day when I was in the area.
Right.
And we just had a hearing for about 5 hours talking about the building of our embassy in the green zone in Iraq and the shoddy work that had been done, and going out getting people who, number one, couldn't understand the language that they were given orders in, had different customs and traditions, and they brought a lot of people in who wore turbans, and they couldn't take their turbans off to put the hard hats on, and so on. I'm saying, well, who did the recruitment, and so on. So we're very aware of capacity. Are you familiar with the economic growth in Vanuatu, and say in the last year to 5 years? What would that be?
It's been low. I'm afraid I don't know offhand what it has been in the last couple of years, but it was behind several other countries in the region.
Yeah. What would their growth have to be to bring them up to another level of economic security, if I can use that description?
Certainly higher than, I think 3% is,
3%.
The population growth is, I think, something like 2.4%. So you have to get a growth rate in excess of the population to really lift up the real income of the NI Vanuatu.
Can that be reached with our assistance, say with the rest of this decade, within this decade?
I think that our assistance is clearly going to make a difference. It's not going to, even though it's pretty generous in a per capita basis, it's not by itself going to lift, it's not going to produce, the 7, 8, 9% growth rates that I think are probably required to really reduce that kind of poverty.
But in a realistic way, what could be done throughout this decade?
I think it's what we're doing. It's the building of the roads. It's the connecting Vanuatu with the economy within the 83 islands, and then obviously bringing in tourists, bringing in outside investment, doing the things that the NI Vanuatu recognize they need to do as well.
Well, we had this discussion dealing with the marshals yesterday. Is it realistic to think we can increase the economy with tourism? Because I find in those islands, I was there in the Federated States of Micronesia, and there are no sandy beaches, mangrove, no golf courses. Maybe we can put some in. What would attract the tourists? And no cruise ships that go down, and planes take off once or twice a week. So how would we do that, say, within the decade,
I think,
realistically?
Of course. I think that tourism clearly is one of the answers. The growth rates that I saw for tourism were on the order of 15%, but tourists are used to a certain degree of infrastructure, hotels, restaurants, wharves, offloading.
You don't have them.
I know, and that's exactly what we hope this compact is going to help address.
Well, we're going to need far more than is appropriated if we're going to look realistically at bringing about some success within this decade, and probably will be into the next decade. Knowing that area, and what I found, I'll repeat what I said yesterday, is that there are customs and traditions that have a tremendous impact. And we can't visualize, how they do, but if it's not approved by, I don't know, they have a non-marquee, but the highest person with it, it doesn't get done. You have to build an entrepreneurial spirit too, and you have very few, shall I say, private investors that will come in and invest. You got to have that too. So there are a whole lot of factors that I'm hoping MCA will take into consideration. We'll start at level 1 and hope to be able to build up within this decade to take us to level 2.
Thank you. Agreed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I thank the gentlelady for her comments. And one of the concerns and the problems that I have seen over the years in these island nations, not just in the Pacific, as I'm sure it is true even in the Caribbean and other regions of the world, is that we build unrealistic expectations on how the economies of these small entities are going to compete with the modern world. You raised the issue of tourism. Well, all other countries are competing for the same market in tourism. So I think sometimes we are very unrealistic. Now, subsistence economy, you can live with that because you don't need to go to another island, catch my fish and my coconuts, and I'm a happy man. But to expect that I have to have a wardrobe and 5 pairs of shoes, the idea that I can travel freely to another country, another destination in these island countries, just the essence of having sufficient water. As you know, my own personal experience in living in these atolls, water is more important than anything else. And it's not as simple as the problem is that we have Western standards and we say, okay, here's the money, get yourself a good way to live and come up to where the rest of the world is. Not as simple as we think it is. And then we raise these expectations with these island nations, leaders, and to suggest that, the goal is out there and we just have to reach for it and in a very unrealistic way. And as you know, Dr. Gutnick, we have the same issues that we raised with a country like the Republic of the Marshall Islands. We did tremendous harm to the environment, to the lives and the properties belonging to the people of the Marshall Islands, where we conducted 67 nuclear bomb detonations. It literally blew out an entire island, where we conducted the first hydrogen bomb detonation ever in the history of mankind. That's the modern world's commitment to win the Cold War, I suppose. And these island people had no idea, no concept of what was coming, or what followed. So now we're trying to rebuild their structures and to suggest, as you had, in my humble opinion, that the fact that the Vanuatu leaders made the right decision. You have to have roads, you have to have wharves, you have to have these basic infrastructures if there's going to be any sense of economic development just to do these basic things. So I'm concerned about this. And the fact that we can make a projection, $65 million, they're probably going to need $800 million if we really want to do a first-class job in helping them. For 200,000 people? So this is where it doesn't really, we can paint a real shiny picture and suggesting that this is what we're going to achieve. But realistically, I have some very serious questions where we say to these small entities of these countries that don't have very big economies that it can be done. Nauru is an excellent example where the phosphate is now completely harvested and taken, and the island is full of holes. They can't even go back and live there in their own island. The phosphate is gone. 8,000 people, and they squandered so much of their wealth, and now it's almost like a small island desert, if you will, because it's uninhabitable. I didn't mean to give you all my grievings here, but
happy to receive it.
But I sincerely hope that this hearing will set the tone. Hopefully, too, my good friend and colleague from California, that I would welcome to submit for the record any recommendations on part of the MCC as well as GAO, how we can better develop the legislation or necessary amendments to the current law so that we don't end up with different standards, so to speak, and so that the GAO would be speaking from the same sheet of music as you would the MCC, and then and we all live together as a happy family. I think it was somebody who said, why can't we just get along? And with that, gentlemen, I really appreciate your coming and your most eloquent and very, very insightful statements this afternoon. Look forward in working with both of you again in the future.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The hearing is ended.